Red Hollow was a speck on the map, barely worth the ink. Just a scatter of buildings huddled against the sun-scorched ribs of the canyons, where the wind carried dust like whispers of old sins. The land was dry, stubborn, and so were the people who clung to it. They didn't ask questions unless they had to, especially when strangers came through. The man rode into town on a sway-backed mule, wrapped in a weathered poncho that flapped like a flag of ruin. His boots were cracked, his hat pulled low. He moved like someone who'd walked through fire and kept walking. Folks watching from porches didn't say a word. They just noted the limp, the scar on his cheek, the way his eyes never settled on one place too long. The saloon doors didn't creak behind him. He didn't enter. He just passed, headed down toward the edge of town, where the land broke into scrubland and dying trees. Clara Densmore saw him before he reached her gate. She stood on her porch, shotgun in hand, her silhouette framed by the golden light of a sun inching westward. Her land was modest, an old barn, 3 goats, a tired horse, and a house she and her husband built before the dueling gang took him. She didn't lower the shotgun when he approached. "You're 2 years too late," she said. The man stopped a few paces away. He removed his hat. A quiet gust carried the scent of creosote and blood. "I heard," he replied. His voice was roughened by distance, but she knew it. That voice had once made her laugh on summer nights. Now it sounded like it belonged to someone else entirely. "I should shoot you," she said. "You won't," he said, glancing at the barn. "Still keep horses?" "One." She hesitated. "He limps. Like you." He smiled, just a flicker of it, but it faded fast. "I need a place. Just a night or two." Clara stepped down from the porch. Her eyes studied his torn sleeve. The dried blood crusted beneath it. "You need more than that. Come on." Inside the barn, the scent of hay and oil mingled with the heavier, iron smell of old wounds. She helped him onto a crate and fetched a cloth and water. He didn't flinch as she cleaned the gash on his arm. "You always did find trouble," she murmured. He didn't answer. "You got a name now?" she asked. "They call me Trace." She paused, cloth still pressed to his skin. "Trace? What kind of name is that?" "The kind that leaves no footprints." She shook her head and sat back, still full of riddles. He leaned against the beam behind him and looked at her, really looked, like he was trying to memorize something he never thought he'd see again. "You heard of Wade Doolin?" he asked. Her eyes darkened. "I know him. He runs Red Hollow now. What the sheriff doesn't steal, Wade takes. He's why I'm here." Clara stood. She moved to the stall and fed her horse, hiding her face from him. "You're not the only one with scores to settle. Wade came here last winter, claimed half my land, said I was keeping it warm for his boys." "You give it up." "I gave him lead," she said quietly. "Buried one of his men under the cottonwood tree. The rest backed off for now. But they'll come again." Trace looked at the barn door, half-hinged and sun-bleached. "You always were braver than smart." "I survived. That's more than I can say for my husband." He didn't apologize. Words like that were too small, too brittle. He knew the weight of what he'd left behind. Instead, he said, "I aim to kill Wade." She turned back toward him. "That a promise, or just something to keep you warm at night?" He looked up at the rafters, then back at her. "It's all I've got left." The wind shifted, whistling through cracks in the wall. Somewhere out in the dry brush, a coyote called. "Town's watching," she said. "They've seen you. Word will travel fast." "Let it. I ain't hiding." Clara crossed her arms. "Then you're a fool. Wade's got 10 men and more rifles than teeth. You come at him swinging, he'll come back with fire." "I know." She stared at him a long time. Then she sighed. "Stay in the barn. I won't feed you, but I won't shoot you either." "Fair enough." As she turned to go, she paused at the door. "You still got that coin? The one with the hole in it?" He reached into his pocket and held it up, gleaming dull in the fading light. "Always. You gave me that once," she said, her voice softer now. "Said it'd keep me safe." He tucked it away. "Did it?" "No," she said, stepping out into the dark. "But I never threw it away." Trace leaned back and close his eyes. The barn creaked around him. Dust danced in slivers of golden light. He was back in Red Hollow, and the past had finally caught up. But so had something else, unfinished love, or maybe just the ghost of it. And outside, somewhere in the growing dusk, Wade Doolin sat fat in his stolen chair, drinking whiskey poured by trembling hands, not knowing that the war had just begun. Trace didn't sleep that night. He lay on the barn floor, one hand resting on the revolver beside him, eyes wide open in the dark. The wind slid through the cracks, humming low and mean, like it carried warnings meant only for the broken. He remembered everything. 10 years ago, Wade Doolin had been nothing but a loud-mouthed rustler with a charm too slick to trust. They'd run with the same crew for a while, pulling small heists, playing cards, chasing the kind of easy danger that feels good when you're too young to know the cost. Then came the railroad job in Montana Territory. A simple plan turned sideways. A marshal caught a bullet in the spine, and someone had to take the fall. Wade pointed the finger. Trace took the blame. He escaped the noose only by slipping into the desert, learning to vanish, survive, kill when needed. 10 winters hardened him. 10 summers baked the old Trace right out of his skin. What returned wasn't a man looking for redemption. It was a man looking to settle a ledger. At dawn, Clara found him saddling the mule. "You riding off already?" she asked, arms crossed, apron still dusted in flour. "Scouting," he replied. "I need to know how many men Wade's got, how they move, where they sleep." "You planning to face them all yourself?" "Not planning. Just prepared." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Don't make this town bleed, Trace. They've lost enough. We've lost enough." His eyes softened, if only for a second. "That's why I'll do it quiet." He rode west toward the canyons, a stretch of ragged stone ridges and arroyos carved by centuries of forgotten storms. There, hidden in the bones of the land, was an abandoned mining camp, now Wade Doolin's nest. Trace crept close under cover of dusk, watching from the high rocks. Wade had built himself a kingdom of cowards and killers. Tents scattered around the old shafts, guarded by half-drunk men with cocked rifles and lazy eyes. Horses tethered, a wagon loaded with crates, rifles, ammunition, maybe worse. No discipline, no fear, just greed. Trace counted 12 men, including Wade. Most stayed drunk after sundown. Sloppy. Predictable. He smiled beneath the brim of his hat. That was their mistake. That night, 2 of Wade's riders were sent to Clara's land to remind her who owned Red Hollow now. Trace saw them coming. He didn't wait. He took the first one at the creek crossing, dragged him from his horse, slit his throat before the man could cry out. The second he let ride right to Clara's porch. Just as the outlaw raised his hand to knock, Trace's bullet dropped him face first into the dirt. Clara opened the door moments later, eyes wide, shotgun in hand. "He was gonna burn your barn," Trace said. "I figured." She stared down at the body. "Now Wade will send more. Let him." She looked at him then, really looked. "What happened to you out there?" "I stopped asking for justice," he said, "and started making it." By morning, the town knew. Sheriff Holden found the body still warm outside Clara's door and rode into town, wearing his badge like it meant something. But folks saw the way he flinched when Wade Doolin passed by. They saw where his loyalties bent. In the saloon, Trace watched from a dark corner as Holden spoke with Wade. "2 of your boys gone," Holden said. "Town's nervous." Wade sipped his drink slow, gold rings gleaming on fingers stained with cigar smoke. "Then calm him down, Sheriff. That's your job." "You think it's the girl?" Wade shook his head. "No, she ain't that reckless. It's someone else." He turned, eyes scanning the room. Trace didn't blink. Later that day, Wade's men raided a ranch north of town, burned it to the ground, sent a message in the smoke. The people of Red Hollow buried a family that evening. Husband, wife, 2 sons. No law came to stop it. Clara stood among the mourners, with her shoulders drawn tight. Trace watched her from afar. She didn't cry, not where anyone could see, but her knuckles were white around the prayer book she held. That night, Trace returned to the canyons. He moved like a ghost, cutting picket lines, freeing horses, scattering them into the hills. He poured lamp oil into the food stores, lit them with a match. Firelight danced against the rock walls as startled men scrambled and cursed. By the time the smoke cleared, 4 horses were gone, and 2 men were bleeding from traps hidden in the brush. Wade lost sleep and patience. He gathered his men and rode into town, bold as sunrise. Walked straight into the saloon and addressed the room. "You got a coward among you," he said, voice slick and smiling. "He's been killing my boys and playing games. I don't like games. So here's how this one ends." He nodded to one of his men. The outlaw dragged a boy up from the cellar, barely 12, shaking. "This kid says he saw a man riding out near the Densmore place." The room held its breath. "You folks have till sundown tomorrow," Wade said, drawing a knife and pressing it to the boy's throat. "You give me the ghost, or I start carving this town one name at a time." He left the boy alive, but scared enough to send a message. Back at Clara's, Trace paced the barn like a caged wolf. "I should have killed him 10 years ago," he muttered. Clara watched from the doorway. "And if you had, you wouldn't be here now." "You think this is fate?" "No. I think it's a mistake you finally got the courage to fix." He stopped. "He's gonna come for you." "Then let him." She stepped closer. "But not before we're ready." He studied her, saw the fire in her eyes. The same fire she had when she was 17, daring him to jump the ravine with a broken saddle. She hadn't changed. The world had only chipped away the softness. Trace walked to the corner of the barn and pulled aside a pile of tarp, revealing 2 saddlebags. Inside, sticks of dynamite, coils of rope, rusted bear traps, and a rifle with a scope he'd carved himself. "I've been ready for 10 years, he said. Clara nodded once, slow. "Then we make the town ready too." Trace looked toward the setting sun. The shadows stretched long and thin across the hills. Tomorrow would bring blood. He could feel it in his bones. But this time, the ghosts wouldn't be hiding. They'd be waiting. Morning broke red. The sun climbed over the cliffs like a slow fire, setting the sky ablaze with colors too violent to be beautiful. Red Hollow stirred under its heat, shutters creaking open, wary eyes peering out. No laughter, no wagons rolling, just silence stretched thin as wire. Trace stood outside Clara's barn, watching the horizon. His hat shadowed a face chiseled by sleepless nights and bitter resolve. In his hands, he held the long rifle, the scope glinting in the dawn. At his feet, saddlebags lay packed, not for fleeing, but for war. Clara approached with a flask of coffee and a hard biscuit. "You slept." "Didn't need to," he said, taking both. He chewed in silence, eyes never leaving the hills. She watched him a moment. "The townsfolk are scared. Some are talking about handing you over to Wade." He nodded. "Doesn't matter. Wade doesn't want justice. He wants a spectacle." Clara crossed her arms. "He'll get one." They'd spent the night preparing, rigging the alley behind the saloon with tripwires and oil, stacking crates for cover, loading every weapon Trace had carried across 5 territories. Clara had hidden dynamite beneath the sheriff's porch, knowing Wade would use it for his grand entrance. Sheriff Holden hadn't stopped them. He only sat in his office with a bottle, the star on his chest dulled with shame. By midday, Wade rode in. 12 horses, 11 men. Wade led them like Caesar entering Rome, dressed in a white duster, gold spurs flashing. He smiled like a man who thought himself untouchable. Behind him, tied to a horse, was a boy, same one he'd held a knife to in the saloon. They stopped in the square. "Bring him out," Wade shouted, "or I start shooting your children." Trace stepped from the shadow of the general store, calm, centered, like he'd been waiting all his life for this moment. "You want me?" he called. "I'm right here." Wade laughed. "Well, hell, Trace. You could have just knocked." "Let the boy go." "Now, what would be the fun in that?" Then the shot rang out. Not from Wade's men. Not from Trace. From the bell tower above the church, where Clara lay prone with a rifle, breath steady. One of Wade's men fell back, blood blossoming from his throat. The boy broke loose in the confusion, darting toward the livery. Chaos cracked like thunder. Trace dropped to one knee and fired twice. One man fell from his saddle. Another screamed as he clutched a shoulder. Bullets sliced the air. Townsfolk ducked behind barrels and doors. Sheriff Holden staggered into the street, pistol drawn, but caught a round in the chest before he could shout a word. Wade bellowed orders, dismounted, and took cover behind the trough. "Find that woman. Kill her first." Trace moved like a ghost between buildings, using cover, baiting shots. The traps worked. 2 more men down in the alley, torn up by hidden iron teeth. Clara fired again, then vanished from the tower, slipping down the back ladder. They were shadows, striking, disappearing, bleeding Wade's numbers one by one. In the smoke and panic, Trace spotted Wade making for the sheriff's office, dragging a crate. He knew what was inside. Dynamite. Trace ran. He reached the porch just as Wade struck a match. "Don't," Trace said, rifle raised. Wade froze, turning slowly. "You wouldn't shoot me, old friend." "We were never friends." Wade grinned. "You owe me." "For what?" "For not putting a bullet in you back then. You remember? Montana. I could have let you swing." "You should have," Trace said, and pulled the trigger. The shot took Wade in the leg. He screamed, fell back, the match flying from his hand. The dynamite rolled off the crate, harmless. Trace stepped forward, gun still leveled. "You ruined lives," Trace said. "For what?" "Land. Fear. I built something." Wade growled, clutching his thigh. "You tore it down. You built it on blood. On lies." Wade spat at his feet. "What are you now?" "A hero." Trace lowered the gun, just enough to make the answer sting. "No. I'm the reckoning." But before he could finish it, another shot rang out, Clara, from across the street. The bullet tore through Wade's chest. He sagged, coughing red, and crumpled into the dirt like wet paper. Silence returned. One by one, Wade's surviving men dropped their guns and raised their hands. The townsfolk emerged from their hiding spots, wide-eyed, hushed. For the first time in years, Red Hollow stood without a shadow looming over it. Clara walked across the street, rifle slung over her shoulder. She looked down at Wade's body, then up at Trace. "Would have been easier to just shoot him first," she said. Trace looked at the sky, now darkening with late-day clouds. "Sometimes justice has to be seen." She nodded, then gestured at the townspeople gathering. They saw. Trace holstered his rifle. "Then maybe they'll remember." He walked away from the sheriff's office, past the bodies, past the wounded pride of a town that had let itself be ruled by fear. He didn't speak as the people parted for him. Some looked grateful, some unsure. He didn't need their thanks. He'd done what had to be done. But as he passed Clara, he paused. "You still got that coin." She reached into her pocket and handed it to him. "Doesn't work, remember?" He closed her hand around it. "No, but maybe now it means something else." Clara met his eyes. "Where will you go?" He looked toward the road, toward the endless line of horizon, "Where I'm needed." And then he left, just like he had once before, except this time, he left justice in his place. Weeks passed, and the dust from the reckoning settled into the soil of Red Hollow like a story buried deep, waiting for retelling. The air turned cooler. Autumn pressed gently against the canyons and wind-worn fences, bringing a quieter rhythm. But quiet didn't mean peace. Not fully. Not yet. Trace hadn't been seen since that day. He rode out of town with little more than his saddlebag, his rifle, and a silence that refused to part from him. Some said he headed west, toward California. Others swore he joined a caravan guarding settlers from rustlers. Most figured he disappeared into the desert like smoke, leaving behind only a legend. Clara stayed. With Wade gone, she reopened her father's smithy and turned the place into something useful again. She worked beside the embers, her hands calloused and eyes sharp, fixing horseshoes, welding hinges, and reforging the locks that once couldn't keep evil out. Her rifle stayed close, propped near the forge, not from fear, but as a reminder. The townsfolk began walking taller. Sheriff Holden's badge was passed to a young deputy named Rusk, a quiet man who'd helped lead the cleanup after the shootout. He didn't talk much, but he listened, and folks respected that. Red Hollow tried to rebuild, not just the storefronts and fences, but the spine they'd lost long ago. Still, scars remained. Wade's men, those who'd survived, were locked in the old jailhouse under constant watch. Clara testified at the circuit judge's hearing, alongside 3 other townsfolk and a boy who no longer stammered when he spoke. Justice rolled through on wheels, slow, deliberate, and reluctant to trust. But it came. One night, as Clara swept ash from the forge, she found something left behind, Trace's coin. The one that always landed wrong. It lay on the workbench beside a folded scrap of paper. She hadn't noticed it before. She picked it up, the metal cool and solid in her palm. The note was brief. When peace is too clean, it means something's still hidden. Don't let them forget why it costs so much. No signature, but none was needed. She closed her fist around the coin and looked out at the darkening sky. The horizon never stopped pulling men like Trace, the kind built for war, but cursed to leave peace behind them. The church bell tolled in the distance. A funeral. They were burying one of the townsmen who'd taken up arms beside Trace, a cobbler who'd never held a gun before that day but stood his ground in front of the bakery, refusing to let Wade's men pass. His widow wept quietly by the grave, her hand clenched around a locket. Clara watched from the hill. She didn't cry, but her jaw tightened, her breath slowed. Peace, after all, carried a price not everyone saw. Later that evening, Rusk approached her by the smithy. He held his hat in his hands like a schoolboy. "You think he'll come back?" he asked. Clara didn't answer right away. She dipped a ladle into the rain barrel and took a long drink. Then, men like that don't circle back. They just leave the ground steadier than they found it. Rusk looked out toward the horizon. Town's better off now. For how long? He didn't reply. He didn't need to. That night, Clara walked alone through the main street. The town was quiet. Shutters closed. Lanterns flickering warm behind windows. Children asleep. She paused in front of the old saloon, now boarded up and for sale. A bullet hole still marred the sign. She traced it with her finger. And then she heard it, faint hoofbeats, far off, echoing down from the pass. She turned, eyes narrowing, heart catching. But it wasn't Trace. Just a trader wagon arriving late, its wheels groaning under sacks of flour and tobacco. The driver tipped his hat. Clara offered a small nod and moved on. Disappointment didn't show on her face, but it curled in her chest. Trace had done what he came to do. He hadn't stayed for the praise or the rebuilding. He'd left his mark and vanished. The man from nowhere. The ghost who fought for love, for justice, and for redemption. She reached her porch, sat on the top step, and watched the stars emerge. Somewhere out there, he rode under the same sky. Maybe to another town in need. Maybe into trouble that couldn't be outrun. Maybe toward forgiveness he'd never believe he deserved. But Clara would remember. So would Red Hollow. They'd remember how peace came not from preachers or politicians, but from a fugitive who believed love was worth fighting for. From a man who didn't need a badge to do what was right. And in that, perhaps, was the cost of real peace. It had to be paid by someone who expected nothing in return.